Story 1. My name is Walter Hensley. I've worked as a cemetery groundskeeper in Hollow Creek, Minnesota, for longer than I ever planned to. It's the kind of town you only find when you're lost, or when something wants you to be found. The cemetery here isn't large, no more than 6 full sections and a hillside for veterans, but it's old. Older than the post office, older than most of the churches. Some of the stones don't even have names, just symbols no one can explain anymore, worn away by rain and decades of snow. I live in a small wooden house just beyond the southern gate, close enough to hear when the wind moves through the tombstones. It's a quiet life usually, a lonely one too, but it has its rhythm. People die, I dig, and then time keeps moving. But the rhythm broke one Tuesday morning in early spring. It had snowed the night before, one of those wet, heavy April snows that covers everything like a cold sigh. I was walking the rows, brushing off the tops of the headstones with my glove, when I noticed something strange near the end of the southernmost path. A single lily sat on the far corner of the oldest section, placed gently on a headstone I had always ignored. It wasn't one of the newer polished stones with granite etchings or family plots with statues of angels. No, this one was barely more than a slab of rock, old and nameless, the text eroded into silence. The flower, though, it was alive, fresh, vibrant, unaffected by the snow, as if someone had just placed it there minutes before. I looked around instinctively, but there were no fresh footprints in the powder, no tire tracks, nothing. The gate had remained locked all night. Only I had the key, and I always double-checked. I stared at that lily for a long time, until the wind picked up and reminded me I was shivering. The next Tuesday, I found another flower, same place, another lily, perfectly intact. This time there was no snow, but the grass around the grave was still damp from morning frost. Yet the flower wasn't. It was dry, warm to the touch, and humming faintly, though that last part I convinced myself was just a trick of the ears. I looked around again. No one. No signs of visitors. That slab didn't even have a proper name on the register, just a number. Lot 6B, Stone 72. I'd passed it for decades and never once thought to question it. By the third Tuesday I was expecting it, and sure enough, there it was. Same lily, same position, same impossible perfection. Not a petal out of place. It was like someone, or something, was refusing to let it wilt. I started keeping a notebook that day. Just a plain leather one I'd used for oil changes back when I was a mechanic. Now, it tracked every flower. I marked the weather, the exact time I found it, the condition of the ground. I even took pictures with an old Polaroid camera I'd saved from my daughter's wedding. The photos came out just as crisp, the lily almost glowing, even in black and white. But there was something else, something I hadn't noticed before. The soil beneath the headstone had changed. On most graves, the earth settles after a few months, sinks slightly, hardens with time. But this one, it looked like it had just been turned over. Not disturbed, not dug, just loose, breathing. I didn't touch it. I didn't even kneel. Just stood there, looking down at that flower and feeling, for the first time in years, that I wasn't alone. I started checking the cemetery cameras. There's one that overlooks the main drive, another near the chapel, and a small motion-triggered one I had put on a tree facing the south row after some kids vandalized graves last Halloween. None of them showed anything, not even shadows, not even wind. And yet, without fail, every Tuesday morning the flower was there. Not replaced, not rearranged, the same. After the 6th week, I asked myself the obvious question: why that grave? Why no name? I went into the town archives, pulling out dusty death records and old cemetery maps. Most of them hadn't been touched in years, the paper brittle and yellowing, typed with a fading ribbon font. Stone 72 was listed as unidentified female, circa 1890. No cause of death, no family, no origin. Just a vague note from the coroner. Severe decomposition upon discovery. No further identification possible. And beside that, in red ink, a word I'd never seen in any of the other reports. Empty. I thought it meant no ID, but it could mean something else. Something more literal. That night, I stood in front of the grave until the stars came out. The flower still rested there, swaying slightly, though there was no wind. I felt something in the air shift. like a weight that had gone unnoticed pressing against my chest. I backed away. My legs felt weak. I locked the gate early that night. I even bolted my door, something I hadn't done in 15 years. The next Tuesday came faster than I expected. I didn't sleep the night before. At 6:45 a.m., I walked the rows, and there it was again. The lily, pure, cold to the eye, warm to the touch. I picked it up this time. As my fingers curled around the stem, something shifted in the air behind me. A pressure, like being watched through water. I turned. No one. But the flower in my hand began to pulse, faintly, a slow heartbeat of warmth. I dropped it. It landed upright, perfectly, on the headstone, as if it had never left. That's when I decided. Next week, I wouldn't just check early. I'd stay all night. I needed to know who, or what, was leaving those flowers, and I needed to know what was buried in a grave with no name. That might not be a grave at all. That Tuesday night, the 7th one since I started watching, I decided to finally do what I'd been too cautious to try before. Stay. Not just pass by. Not just glance from the distance, but sit down and wait. I told the groundskeeper from the town office I was feeling under the weather and wouldn't be in for my usual Wednesday rounds, just in case I needed the whole night and the following day to recover from whatever I found, or didn't. I didn't set up anything elaborate. I didn't want to risk alerting whatever, or whoever, was leaving those flowers. A folding canvas chair, the kind hunters use, a wool blanket, a flask of black coffee, my old Westie surplus binoculars. I positioned myself behind the row of oaks near the back fence, where the light from the street lamp couldn't reach me, but where I had a clear line of sight to the unmarked grave. The flower from the last cycle was still there, resting gently against the stone like it had just been placed. I hadn't touched it, though I'd been tempted. Something about it always felt wrong to disturb. I didn't use a flashlight, didn't smoke. I knew from decades of working in cemeteries that even a single flicker in the wrong place can be seen for yards. This place may be quiet, but it wasn't blind. And lately I'd begun to feel like I wasn't alone here at night, not in the normal sense. The shadows moved in ways they didn't used to. The wind had different rhythms, and sometimes, I swear I heard footsteps not echoing mine, but answering them. Midnight came and went without sound. No gates opened, no voices whispered, no gravel crunched. I kept checking my watch compulsively, the faint green glow ticking past the minutes like a heart monitor. By 2:43 a.m. I was sure it would be another dead night, pun cruelly intended. But then, at exactly 3:12 a.m. it happened. I didn't see anyone arrive. There was no approach, no light, no rustling. But there, unmistakably, resting against the headstone, was a new flower. It hadn't been there a second before. It was just there, as if it had always been. As if I had blinked, and in that blink, reality had shifted. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear, but from confusion so deep it knocked something loose in my chest. I hadn't looked away. I was certain. I'd been staring right at that spot, unblinking. There was no way someone could have walked up, crossed 20 feet of open space, and placed that flower without me seeing. And yet, there it was. This time it wasn't a lily like the previous week. It was a dark red rose, still dewy, as if just cut from the stem. The petals looked too fresh for the cold air to touch, too soft to be real. I lifted the binoculars, hands trembling. I scanned the area. Nothing. No figures in the fog, no footprints in the frost, no breath against the air but mine. And yet, I could feel something watching back. Not like being stalked, more like being judged. I waited. Another 10 minutes, then 20. My hands grew stiff. I wanted to blink but didn't. My eyes burned from the cold and the strain. But no one came back. Nothing else moved. The flower stayed. When the sky finally started to pale with the first touch of dawn, I walked slowly out of my hiding place. The grass crunched under my boots. My limbs were stiff, my breath shallow. The fog hadn't lifted yet, but it felt thinner. I approached the grave carefully, like a man waking up a wild animal. I knelt, touched the stem of the flower. It was cold, but alive. And beneath it, etched faintly into the headstone that I had seen 1,000 times as bare granite, was a single name I'd never noticed before. Or maybe one that hadn't been there until that moment. I read it once, then again, then blinked, and read it a third time. It was my name, just my name. No dates, no epitaph, no mention of father or husband or son, just my name, Walter Hensley. I staggered back like I'd been hit. The fog spun around me, or maybe I spun inside it. I looked again. The name was still there, my name, not carved deep, just etched lightly, like a whisper that could vanish in the rain. And the flower was gone. No sound, no movement, no trick. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. I stumbled away from the grave, almost fell twice. I didn't look back until I was through the gate, standing on the road, my heart pounding like I'd run a mile. That name, that flower, that hour, none of it made sense, but it was real. I didn't sleep that day, or the next. I called the hospital to see if they had records of anyone recently deceased matching my name. Nothing. I checked the town records. No death certificates, no pending paperwork, nothing. And yet, every fiber in me knew something had shifted. The next Tuesday, the flower was back, and so was the name. Clearer this time. This time, with a date. Not a birth date, just a single number. Next week's Tuesday. And all I could do was stand there and wonder. Was the grave ever empty to begin with? Or was it always meant for me? I spent the next 6 days pretending to live a normal life. I mowed the grass. I trimmed the hedges. I polished headstones like I always did, even smiled politely at the families who came to leave flowers or tears. But in my chest, something had shifted. I walked around like a man who'd seen his own grave, and not just the idea of it, the actual stone, with his name carved shallow but certain. And the date? The date was now less than a week away. Tuesday. Always Tuesday. I tried to explain it to my brother over the phone, but the words caught in my throat like thorns. How do you say something like that to someone who knew you as a boy, who remembers you scraping your knees on gravel and laughing when you tried to whistle with a blade of grass? How do you say, I think there's a grave in my cemetery that wants me inside it, and I don't know if I can stop it? He just told me to retire, take a trip, maybe visit Florida like we used to talk about. I said I would, but I didn't. Instead, on the 7th Tuesday, I prepared again. This time I didn't bother with cameras. They hadn't helped before, and I had a suspicion they never would. What I needed now wasn't proof. What I needed was to see it with my own eyes. All of it. I brought a folding chair and a heavy wool blanket, same as before. But this time, I didn't hide. I sat in full view of the nameless grave, just 10 feet away from the stone that now carried my name. I wanted it, whatever it was, to know I was watching. The wind was still that night, dead still. No rustling in the trees, no owls, no coyotes. Even the bugs had gone silent. The cemetery held its breath. At 2:55 a.m., the fog crept in slow, crawling across the grass like fingers. My breath came out in clouds. I clutched the edges of the blanket tighter, watching the stone. It looked unchanged. No flower, just the bare rock, and my name, waiting like a whisper. Then it happened, not all at once. Not like in the movies where the air gets cold and the lights flicker and something snarls from the shadows. No, it was slower than that. Stranger, more wrong. The ground beneath the stone began to darken, as if the earth itself were bleeding upwards. It wasn't blood, though. It was shadow, a shadow that moved independently of light. It curled around the base of the stone like smoke, and from within that smoke, something stepped forward. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I couldn't. The figure was tall, much taller than me, dressed in black, not robes or a cloak or anything old-fashioned, just blackness, the kind that eats light. Its face wasn't hidden, but it wasn't visible either, like your mind refuses to process it. You look, and there's a shape, but no details, like trying to remember a dream you only half had. And in its hand, a flower, a lily, pure white, the same as always. But this time, dripping water from its petals, though there hadn't been rain in 3 days. It didn't walk. It didn't float. It just was. One moment, it was at the edge of the stone. The next, the flower was resting on the granite, gently, deliberately, like a ritual being completed. And then the figure turned, not with steps but with presence, and faced me. I thought I would scream. I thought my heart would stop, but neither happened. Instead, I felt recognition, not of a face, but of a feeling. I had felt it once before, many years ago when I was 16 and I almost drowned in the lake behind my family's farm. I remember sinking, remember the silence of the world closing around me, the pressure of the water, the way the light above looked so distant. I remember thinking, this is it, this is how it ends. And then, I remember peace, not fear, not pain, just surrender. That's what this felt like. Not death, but acceptance. The figure didn't speak, didn't move again, just stood there, watching. And then, it was gone. No flash, no smoke, just absence. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. But the flower remained, and the name on the stone had changed again. Still mine, but now, with 2 dates. Born, October 9th, 1953. Died, today's date. I staggered backward. My legs didn't respond at first. My lungs burned. I reached the shed behind the chapel before I vomited into the grass. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My watch had stopped ticking. The cemetery lights, for the first time in decades, had gone dark. When I woke later that morning on the floor of the tool shed, the sun was already high. Birds were chirping. The headstone was back to being plain again. No name, no flower. But I knew what I'd seen. And whatever it was, it had seen me too. I didn't go back the next night, or the night after that. I told myself it was over. That maybe it was all a dream. A stress-induced hallucination brought on by decades of silence and solitude. But you don't forget the feeling of being seen by something that shouldn't exist. You don't forget a gravestone changing while you're watching it. And you sure as hell don't forget seeing your name etched beside a date that matches the very moment you were still breathing. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe a cruel joke from teenagers who knew my name. Maybe a mistake in the stonework. Some old marker that had been misfiled and resurfaced. But when I brought it up, casually, with the records office, there was nothing. That plot wasn't in the system. No owner, no occupant, no permission filed. It didn't officially exist. And still, every Tuesday, a new flower appeared. I told myself I wouldn't check again. But when the following Monday came, I found myself walking toward the storage shed behind the chapel, hands moving automatically to pull out the old digging tools. My breath was shallow the entire time. Not from fear, at least not the normal kind. This was something deeper, a cold certainty in my bones that I wasn't just returning to a grave. I was returning to something that remembered me. I waited until nightfall. I knew if I tried to open that grave during the day, something would stop me. I don't know how I knew, only that I did. I parked my truck just outside the west gate, brought my headlamp, a lantern, gloves, and spade. No camera, no witness. Just me and the stone with my name that shouldn't have been mine yet. The cemetery was unusually still. The air didn't move. Even the fog seemed hesitant. I walked to the grave with the lantern held low. My boots crunched over frost-laced grass. There were no footsteps, no bird calls, not even the distant sound of a highway, just the hum of breath and blood in my ears. The flower was already there. This time, it wasn't a lily. It was a white camellia, a symbol of mourning in some cultures. In others, a symbol of resurrection. I set the lantern beside the grave and began to dig. The earth gave way easier than it should have, as if it wanted to be opened. No rocks, no roots, just cold, soft soil peeling away like wet fabric. The deeper I went, the more the temperature changed. Not colder, but heavier, denser. Like the air itself had begun to resist me. At just under 4 feet, my spade hit something. Wood. Old, splintered, but not decayed. I cleared the top of the coffin with my hands, brushing dirt off what looked like blackened oak. There were no handles, no nails, no hinges. Just a lid that sat in place, waiting. I hesitated. My breath fogged the lamp's glass. I pressed my palm to the lid. Warm. Not just warmer than the air. Actually, warm. Like skin. I gritted my teeth and slid the lid open. Inside wasn't what I expected. No body, no bones, no fabric, no rot, no silk-lined interior. Just one thing. A single flower. A camellia. Just like the one on top of the stone. But this one floated. suspended inches above the wooden base, as if the laws of gravity didn't apply inside this space. Beneath it, etched directly into the wood, were words burned into the grain. As long as the bloom is placed, the veil holds. As long as the veil holds, the memory remains. If forgotten, it awakens. The air around me thickened. I looked closer and realized there were scratches on the inside of the lid. Long, deep grooves, the kind fingernails make in panic. And that smell, it wasn't death. It was breath, a human breath, faint, like someone sleeping just beneath the soil. I stumbled backward and nearly fell into the loose dirt. The flower inside pulsed, not glowing, not moving, but pulsed, like a heartbeat. I replaced the lid. I shoveled the dirt back, hands shaking. I didn't place the flower from the surface back onto the grave. I held it. I needed to understand. I brought it home in a cloth, placed it in a sealed jar, and left it on my kitchen table overnight. The next morning, the jar was empty. No sign of forced entry. No lid removed. Just gone. And at the same time, on the grave, a new flower, back where it always had been. I went back to the coffin 2 nights later, dug again. This time, the flower was different. A marigold. The inscriptions were still there, but one more had been added beneath them. You cannot bury what remembers itself. And that's when I realized it wasn't a grave. It was a vessel, not for a body, not even for a soul, but for something ancient, something that needed to be remembered. And someone, me, was now responsible for keeping it sealed. I stopped waiting for Tuesdays. After that last flower, the marigold, I understood the truth wasn't going to come in one revelation. It wasn't a puzzle you solved and walked away from. It was more like a deal, one I hadn't agreed to, but had already signed by digging up that grave. Or maybe it signed me the day I first noticed that flower on the nameless stone. Either way, I wasn't just a caretaker anymore. I was a witness, and witnesses are expected to return. The Tuesday after the marigold, I didn't bring tools. I didn't dig. I just stood there at 2:58 a.m., lantern off, staring into the night. At exactly 3:12 a.m., as always, the flower changed. This time it was a forget-me-not, blue and trembling in the windless cold. I didn't blink, didn't move. I understood now what it meant. As long as the bloom is placed, the veil holds, and I had been keeping that veil intact, week by week, flower by flower. Without knowing it, I had become the thread that bound whatever lay beneath that stone to the world above. But the more I watched, the more I began to feel something shifting inside me. Not physically, not even mentally. It was deeper than thought, a kind of erosion of identity, like something was peeling off layers of me I didn't know I had, until I started to forget simple things. The names of tools I'd used for years, the routes I walked every day, the birthdays of my children. My own handwriting looked foreign. My reflection in the chapel mirror didn't blink when I did. I thought it was age. Until I looked in the mirror one morning and saw dirt in my hair. The kind of dirt you only get from underground. The kind of dirt you shouldn't wake up with. That was the week I received the letter. It was on my doorstep. No stamp, no name. Sealed in wax, dark red, almost brown. Inside, a single sentence typed on yellowing paper. The bloom will falter. The vessel must be replaced. No explanation, no sender, but I knew what it meant. The flower was no longer enough. Something beneath that soil was stirring, and the cost of keeping it asleep had increased. So I returned to the grave, dug deeper this time, through the earth, past the coffin, into the roots below. My fingers bled from the effort. My breath grew shallow, but I had to see. At the very bottom of that grave was another casket. Not wood, not stone, but bone. A sarcophagus made from fused ribs, vertebrae, and femurs, coiled into a container that breathed. It pulsed gently, like lungs. It was warm. When I touched it, I saw visions, not dreams, memories, not mine, but memories of others. Hundreds, thousands, all the caretakers before me. Men and women who tended the grave, replaced the flowers, cleaned the stone. Each one slowly losing themselves until they were buried inside that box. I saw their faces, and then I saw mine, already fading. Then came the voice, not a sound, not a whisper, a presence that vibrated through my bones like thunder underwater. It didn't speak words. It made me know. If I did not place the next flower, I would forget myself entirely. But if I did, I'd be asked to go further next time. Eventually, it would not be enough to place the flower. Eventually, I'd need to become it, a replacement, a vessel. I stood there for hours, or minutes. Time no longer worked the way it used to. When I climbed out, my hands were trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the decision I knew was coming. So I made a choice. I returned home. That night, I did not go to the cemetery. Tuesday came. No flower was placed. The veil did not hold. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I felt the scream before I heard it. A pressure in the walls of my house, a sound with no source. Every mirror cracked. My front door burst open, not from wind, from release. I ran outside and saw the cemetery glowing faintly from the south. Not bright, not fire, just a dull red shimmer beneath the ground, like coals shifting under snow. I returned the next night. The grave was sealed again. No flower, no name, but the earth was warmer than ever. I placed a flower, an orchid. I whispered, "Just one more week," and I walked away. But every day since, I've felt something following me. Not physically, not with footsteps, just a feeling, like being stared at from behind a wall, a pressure in my teeth, a flicker in the corner of my eye. And sometimes, when I pass my own headstone to make my rounds, I see my name is back. The date, it's always Tuesday. And I know one day, the flower will not be enough. And when that day comes, I'll be the one inside, and someone else will start to notice a flower that never wilts. Story 2. I've been digging graves for over 30 years, and in all that time I've never seen a body arrive without a name, without a family, and with a warning nailed to the top of the coffin. But that's exactly what happened last month. On a Tuesday, just past midnight, during the kind of cold that sinks into your hands, even through leather gloves. I was working the night shift, as I always do. Fewer distractions, fewer people asking questions. The cemetery sleeps better when no one's looking too closely at what's underneath. The delivery came in an unmarked van. Not government, not funeral home. Just black, rusted, and humming too quietly for the engine to be on. 2 men got out, tall, silent, dressed in gray work clothes, without any badges or names. They didn't speak to me, didn't meet my eyes. They just unloaded the coffin and wheeled it across the gravel toward Plot 9G, a plot that hadn't been used in over a decade. There was no entry for it in the burial registry. No paperwork, no documentation, nothing. I asked who had approved it, and one of them just handed me an envelope. Inside was a single note, handwritten in slanted black ink. "Do not remove the ropes. Bury as is. Do not return to this grave." The lid of the coffin was sealed with thick iron nails, not the usual wood screws or clasps. Crude, bent nails, hammered with something heavy. The kind you'd use to seal a box you really didn't want opened again. I couldn't help myself. Before I even dug the hole, I lifted the lid slightly, just enough to peek through a crack at the top, even with the nails intact. That's when I saw them, the hands. His wrists were wrapped in thick rope, the kind you'd see on old fishing docks, frayed but soaked stiff with something dark. His fingers were gnarled, bent in ways that didn't look like rigor mortis. And his mouth, it was sewn shut, poorly, sloppily, like someone had done it in a rush. I closed the lid and told myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. I dug fast. I didn't ask questions. As the last layer of dirt covered the coffin, I heard something strange, a low creak, like wood flexing under pressure. I paused, waited. It stopped, probably just settling. I kept working. The 2 men didn't wait around. They were already gone before I finished. No signature, no thank you. The van vanished back down the dirt road without headlights. I watched until the trees swallowed it whole. That should have been it. But the next morning, when I returned to inspect the grounds, the soil above that grave had sunken. Not a little, not like usual. It had collapsed nearly 6 inches down. That's the kind of settling that takes months, not 12 hours. And that wasn't the only thing wrong. Coiled beside the grave, half buried in loose soil, was a piece of rope. The same rope, frayed, thick, and twitching slightly, as if something underneath had just let go of it. I didn't report it. I told myself I was tired. that maybe some roots had shifted. Maybe I'd left a coil behind without realizing it. But deep down, I knew the truth. That grave wasn't meant for this cemetery. That man wasn't meant for the ground. And whatever those ropes were for, they weren't there to protect the dead. They were there to protect us. I should have left it at that. But 2 days later, I started noticing them. Not in the same plot, but in others. Graves that had been untouched for decades now had something new. Thin lines of rope growing out of the soil. The first time I noticed the second rope, I was on my knees weeding around a grave that hadn't had a visitor since 1974. It was a quiet morning, the kind of silence that usually means peace. But that day, it just felt paused, like the cemetery was waiting for something. The grave belonged to a woman named Eleanor Harris. I remember her because she was buried with a small porcelain angel, now cracked and half swallowed by the soil. But what caught my attention wasn't the angel. It was a thread that wasn't there the day before. I almost didn't see it. It was buried deep in the corner near the base of the headstone, like a stray shoelace poking through the dirt. I brushed it away with my glove, and that's when I saw the texture. It wasn't just rope. It was the same kind of rope I'd seen on the wrists of the man in 9G. Coarse, dark, soaked through like it had been in the ground for years. Only this grave was nearly half a century old, and I know for a fact she wasn't buried that way. I'd been here when they lowered her in. No ropes, no warnings, just a quiet burial, no family, no fuss. But now the rope was there. I pulled gently at it, just to see how deep it went. It pulled back, not violently, not sudden, but with a kind of tension that wasn't natural, like something down below had noticed me. I let go instantly and stepped back. I waited. Nothing moved. The rope lay still, like it had always been there. That night I barely slept. By the end of the week, I'd found 3 more graves like it. Always old ones. Always graves no one visited anymore. Sometimes the rope was curled around the side, like a root surfacing. Other times, it rose straight up from the center, like it had been pushed out by pressure underneath. One of them even had 2 ropes, one on each side like handles, like it was meant to be pulled back open. I thought about calling the city, reporting it to the district, but what would I say? That dead guy we buried illegally might be spreading his ropes around the graveyard? No one would believe it. Hell, I barely believed it. But something about that first burial had changed the soil, changed the rhythm of the cemetery. Graves don't grow rope. That's not how decomposition works. And yet here I was, walking rows of tombstones with lines of thick cord threading through the ground like veins. Then the birds started acting strange. We get crows sometimes, nothing unusual. But that week they wouldn't leave the area around plot 9G. They circled above it during the day, perched silently on headstones at night, never cawing, just staring. Dozens of them, always watching that one grave. And the morning I found one of them strangled by a rope, half buried in the dirt, I knew this was something worse than unnatural. This was intentional. The rope had looped perfectly around the bird's throat, no signs of a struggle. Its wings were stretched out in a gesture that looked almost ritualistic, as if it had been placed there, not killed randomly, but displayed. A message for anyone still watching. I started keeping track of where the ropes appeared, mapped them on a clipboard. It didn't take long to see the pattern. They were forming a circle, a slow one. Every new rope appeared roughly equidistant from the last, like someone, or something, was spreading from a center point. Plot 9G, the man with the sewn mouth, the wrists bound, the warning that said, "Do not return." And now every week the circle grows wider, the ropes stretch farther, and one morning I found something new, a fresh grave. No name, no marker, but the soil had clearly been disturbed. Shallow, too shallow for a burial. At the center of it, a rope, looped in the shape of a noose, right beside my boot print. That was the first time I wondered if it had started following me. Because the next day, I found rope under my porch. I didn't touch the rope under my porch. I just stared at it, heart sinking into something cold and still. It was coiled neatly, like a gift someone had placed there overnight. Same texture, same wet stiffness, frayed in the same places as the others. But this wasn't the cemetery. This was my house, 40 minutes away from the grounds. I live alone on the outskirts of town, No neighbors, no pranksters, no damn kids sneaking around with campfire stories. No one should have been out there, and no one would have known where to place that rope unless they'd been watching me. I went back to the cemetery at dawn, mind racing, trying to piece things together. I kept thinking about the envelope, the original one. Do not return to this grave. That part had been haunting me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that by pulling the rope at Eleanor Harris's plot, or even touching the one under my porch, I had broken something. Broken a rule I didn't understand. I had to check plot 9G again. Had to see it for myself. When I got there, the dirt above the grave looked undisturbed at first glance. But when I brushed away some of the leaves, I saw it. The letter. The original one. Gone. The envelope that had been nailed to the coffin, the paper I'd saved and placed under a slab stone nearby, had vanished without a trace. In its place, resting on the grass like it had always been there, was a new note, folded precisely. No envelope, different paper, older, darker, as if it had been written decades ago but was still fresh in its purpose. The handwriting wasn't slanted anymore. It was tight, precise, unnatural. The ink looked like rust. Now it's yours. That's all it said. No signature, no explanation. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I read it twice. I folded it slowly, slipped it into my coat pocket, and stood there for a long time, staring at the grave. Nothing moved. The birds were gone. The wind had stopped. But the stillness wasn't peaceful. It was like being underwater, too deep to swim back. The note changed everything. Until then, I could almost convince myself I was witnessing something external, some sickness of the ground, some unexplained rot crawling through the bones of this place. But this meant intent. This meant someone, or something, knew me by name. When I got back to the office trailer near the east gate, I checked the logbooks. I don't usually log unregistered burials. Illegal ones go under the table. But something told me I had to look. Plot 9G was listed, but not the way I remembered. Now, in neat cursive, in a handwriting I didn't recognize, someone had written, "Reserved, transfer initiated." Transfer of what? I flipped back through the last 3 weeks of burial records, trying to spot anomalies, names out of order, missing entries, plots with no assigned remains. That's when I noticed another one. Plot 4B, marked empty for years, now listed as occupied, with no date, just a scribble beneath it. By agreement. I felt something tug in my chest. Not pain, not fear, something deeper. A memory I didn't know I had, like a bell ringing underwater, like something had been decided without me. That night, I dreamed of ropes, not just on graves, in my walls, wrapping around my wrists as I tried to move. I woke up soaked in sweat, with soil on the soles of my feet and the scent of damp bark in my nostrils. But I hadn't gone outside, and on the windowsill, another note, shorter, sharper. The ink looked fresh. Don't let go. I didn't touch that note for 2 hours. I just stared at it on the windowsill like it might start moving on its own. Don't let go. 4 words. 4 nails in a coffin that hadn't finished closing. I'd been waking up in sweat every night since the rope started. But this time, I woke up dirty. That soil on my feet wasn't imagined. I ran my hands over the floor, the bed frame, the mattress. No signs of a break-in, no open windows. But when I stepped outside, barefoot and holding my breath, I saw something I still haven't fully accepted. There was a rope coming out from under my house, not a piece of rope, not a coil like before, a full, living line, like a vein threaded into the earth. It extended from beneath my foundation and disappeared into the woods, pulled taut with just the slightest tremble, like it was under tension. I followed it. I shouldn't have, but some part of me had to know where it went. Maybe I thought it would just stop at the tree line. Maybe I thought I could prove it was a prank, something rational, something human. It didn't stop. The rope cut through the underbrush like a boundary no animal dared cross. The morning light barely made it through the trees, and the air got colder with every step. I walked for what must have been 30 minutes before I noticed something strange. The trees had started to lean inward, like the rope had pulled them into a subtle arch, and the ground began to dip, gradually, then sharply, until I was walking through what felt like a dry riverbed, swallowed by overgrowth and silence. Then I saw it. An open grave. Fresh. No coffin, no name. But the rope, the very same line I'd been following, led directly into it, disappearing into the bottom like it was feeding the earth. And just beside the open pit, lying like a shed skin, was the note from my pocket. The first note, the one that had vanished from plot 9G. Now it's yours. I stepped back. The rope twitched. Just once. Enough to send a ripple down its length. Enough to let me know I was being watched. Or worse, guided. When I turned to go back, I tripped. Not over a root, not over the uneven dirt. Over another rope, thin, coiled, and tightening around my ankle like a reflex. I kicked free, stumbled back, and that's when I realized something horrifying. The rope wasn't attached to anything. It was coming from me. I reached down, frantic, and pulled my pant leg up. Right above the sock line, a thread had pierced the skin, threaded in like a needle, buried just beneath the surface of my calf, weaving under the skin like a parasite. No blood, just the pulsing of something alien, something borrowed. I screamed, tore at it, pulled it free like a splinter made of nightmare, and it came out smooth, whole, twitching in my palm. I ran. I didn't stop until the trees broke and the cemetery fence came into view again. But the damage was done. That rope had come from inside me. Since then I haven't been the same. I feel it, pulling, when I sleep, when I sit too still, when I blink too long and see darkness behind my eyelids that isn't just sleep. It's memory, not mine, buried memory. And every morning I find a new line of rope in the cemetery, not wrapped around graves anymore. Now they run in straight lines, parallel, leading somewhere, forming a pattern I can't yet see, but I feel it closing in, like stitches. I tried burning one. The smoke was black, greasy. It screamed. That night I had no dreams. I had visions. A man, mouth sewn shut. A field of graves breathing in unison. A forest of ropes suspended in air, stretching across the sky like a web of choices already made. And the worst part? In the center, I saw myself. Tied at the wrists, mouth open, eyes begging. But I wasn't asking to be freed. I was asking to be finished. I stopped going home. Whatever was following me had already crossed that threshold. My house wasn't safe, and neither was the graveyard. But at least here, surrounded by stone and silence, I could feel where the dread came from. It had a direction, a weight. I started sleeping in the old caretaker's shed near the cremation oven. It smelled of oil and dust and rot, but it didn't breathe the way the soil did now. I couldn't stand the way the ground breathed, that subtle movement beneath my boots when I walked the older rows, like lungs expanding quietly just below the surface. The ropes were everywhere now, some rising up like roots strangling the air, others curling along the pathways as if outlining something sacred and forgotten, a design I hadn't yet understood. And then, finally, one night, I did. It happened slowly, like a veil being lifted one finger at a time. I was mapping the graves again, trying to measure the direction the ropes were spreading from. Plot 9G was the center. That had always been clear. But the longer I looked, the more I realized the shape wasn't random. It wasn't a circle. It was a hand. 5 fingers reaching. The ropes weren't growing. They were searching. And one of those fingers was pointing to me. That's when I found the final grave. It wasn't marked on any of the maps. It wasn't on the registry. But it was perfect. Not just fresh, prepared. The dirt was soft. The hole was exact. The air around it still. Too still. Like the world had held its breath in anticipation. A folded suit sat neatly beside the open plot, along with a nameplate that hadn't yet been affixed. My name. No title. No birth date. Just my name. Engraved in metal that was cold to the touch, even in the heat of summer. I ran. Not far. Not fast. But away. As if distance could loosen the knot I felt tightening around my chest. But it didn't matter where I went. The roads bent. The shadows followed. Every time I looked behind me, the sky seemed darker, closer. The stars above no longer flickered. They watched. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat by the gate until morning, and when the sun rose, I thought maybe it had passed. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe this would all recede like a storm that never quite made landfall. But then I saw the funeral procession. It wasn't scheduled. There was no hearse, no mourners. Just 5 figures, draped in black, walking slowly through the cemetery road like they'd been walking for centuries. They carried nothing. No coffin, no flowers, just presents. And they stopped, without a word, at my grave, the one with my name. They didn't speak, they didn't move. They just stared at me. And one of them, tall, robed in a way that didn't quite touch the ground, reached into its cloak and pulled out a small length of rope. It dropped it at my feet, and then they turned and left, vanishing behind the tombstones like smoke unraveling into the air. The rope twitched once, then twice, then coiled around itself, forming a knot, a loop, the same knot I'd seen in the woods, the same shape I'd dreamed of in the visions, the same one I'd pulled from beneath my own skin. I understood. This wasn't a curse. It was an appointment, a calling deeper than blood, older than soil. I hadn't been infected. I'd been chosen. The ropes weren't trying to bury me. They were trying to bring me back, because someone had to take his place. The man in 9G, the one with the warning, the one whose burial broke the rhythm of the dead. And now that rhythm had found a new beat, mine. I walked to the grave. I didn't resist. I stepped into the hole. The earth was soft. The air was warm. The ropes curled around my wrists. Not tight, not harsh, gentle, like old friends remembering the shape of my skin. I looked up once, just once, at the empty sky, and then the dirt began to fall. Not by shovel, not by hand. It simply fell, as if the world itself had agreed. I don't remember closing my eyes, but I do remember the pressure of the final knot, not binding me, completing me. And somewhere above me, just before everything went silent, I swear I heard a voice whisper the only thing that ever mattered. Don't let go. Story 3. My name's Ellis Grant, 63 years old this October, and I've been a nightman in 3 cemeteries across 2 states for the better part of 41 years. I've buried husbands who outlived their kids and kids who never had time to lose their baby teeth. I've seen crypts sink, mausoleums flood, trees split graves in half, and once, I found a coyote chewing on the ankle of a man who'd only been in the dirt for 4 hours. Nothing surprises me anymore. That's what I told myself anyway. That was before she arrived. It was the first Monday of the month, right at the start of the summer shift change, when the office sent out a memo that I'd be getting support staff for the overnight hours. Not a full hire, just someone to shadow me. A new policy, cutbacks, efficiency. They always come up with some slick word for it. But it's always the same story. Someone younger, someone cheaper, someone temporary. I didn't complain. I've been doing this long enough to know that resisting change just makes it hungrier. So when I heard the knock on the maintenance office door at exactly 11 p.m., I figured it was her. I opened the door and there she was, standing too straight for someone who wasn't military, holding a clipboard with nothing written on it and a badge clipped to her coat that simply read, "Intern." She introduced herself as Mara, just Mara, no last name. Her voice was calm, polite, but flat, like a radio left on during a signal outage. She looked young, early 20s, pale, with dark hair too black to be natural. She didn't smile, didn't blink. I watched for it, and it never came. She said she'd been sent by Central Operations. That's not a phrase we use in this business. We have regional offices, local admins, ground supervisors. Nobody says Central Operations unless they're talking about a war room or a prison. But again, I didn't ask. She had the kind of presence that made questions feel like trespassing. I handed her a pair of gloves and a flashlight and told her we'd start with the lower west plots, the older ones. Easier work for a first shift. She didn't respond, just nodded once and followed me. No hesitation, no shuffle, not even a glance at her surroundings. It was like she already knew the layout. As we walked past rows 7 through 12, she paused once, just once, at an unmarked grave near the old willow. A grave I'd always assumed was an unregistered burial from decades ago, before digital logs. She stood there, still, staring at it for maybe a full minute. I waited. Then I said we needed to move. She turned to me slowly and said, "He's not here anymore." I didn't know how to respond to that. I'd never told her that was a grave. Hell, I hadn't even stopped walking. But she said it like it was a fact. Not speculation, not observation. A statement. We worked in silence for the rest of the night. or I worked. She mostly stood by the headstones watching. Not me, not the sky, just the graves, one after another. Eyes wide, never narrowing, never shifting, and never blinking. At one point, I dropped my shovel. She flinched, not from the noise, but as if something had snapped her out of whatever trance she'd been in. Then she said, "Don't let them speak to you." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to know. We finished at around 3:30 a.m. I turned around to tell her to take a break, but she was already gone. No footsteps, no gate creaking, nothing. I checked the clock again and realized 20 minutes had passed without me noticing. That's not normal. I've never blacked out, never lost time. That was the first night, the first shift, and even now, I find myself wondering if she ever actually knocked, or if the door just opened. Because the next morning I went to the front office to get her file, and there wasn't one. No intern application, no ID photo, no paperwork, no proof she existed. Just a sticky note left on my locker. 5 words, written in black ink. "She's not assigned to you." The next night, I showed up early. Earlier than I've ever clocked in for anything that wasn't a funeral for someone I knew. The sun hadn't even touched the horizon yet. I told myself it was to prep the tools, check the inventory, make sure the backhoe was fueled, but the truth was simpler. I wanted to see if she'd arrive the same way, out of nowhere, with no car, no sound, no wait. But when 11 o'clock came, she was already there, standing beside the north gate, motionless, exactly where the shadows from the old crematorium swallowed the gravel path. I hadn't seen her approach. I hadn't heard the gate. She just appeared. She didn't greet me, didn't nod, just started walking, like the first night had never ended, like she'd never left. That unsettled me in a way nothing ever had before, and I found teeth buried outside graves, bones where they shouldn't be, dolls clutched in the arms of things that weren't children anymore. But this calm, blank persistence felt wrong in a deeper way, a way I didn't have words for. I needed to know if it was just me, if I was slipping. So during our rounds, I let the camera in the chapel keep rolling. We had a single old surveillance system wired through the original bell tower, tied into the maintenance room. Outdated as hell, recorded in grainy monochrome. But it worked. I knew it worked. I've used it for decades. It's caught teenagers sneaking in, foxes dragging flowers off graves, even a drunk once who slept inside a mausoleum and left half naked at dawn. If she was there, it would catch her. I made sure of it. I even waved at the lens as we passed. Twice. She never looked up. When the shift ended, I waited until daylight, locked the gates, and rushed into the surveillance room, popped in the VHS we used for overnight rotation, sat down, rewound. I wasn't ready for what I saw. I was there, clear as day. Well, as grainy VHS night can be. Me in my uniform, making rounds, alone. I stopped the tape, rewound, played again, slower, alone. I'm walking past the West Rose, alone. I'm sweeping near the fountain, alone. I'm waving at the lens I knew was recording us, and no one's beside me. No movement, no shadow, not even the flicker of another body passing. Just me. I stood up, heart hammering, palms damp, and rewound to the time we were in the chapel. I remembered that moment clearly because she'd touched the glass lid of a sealed casket, leaned in close like she was listening to it. On the tape, I walk into frame. I stand over the casket. I lean down, alone. I looked closer, and there it was. My head tilts the same way hers did. My hand rests on the lid where she'd touched. My mouth moves, though I never remembered speaking. It was like I had become her, or she had become me, but that wasn't the worst part. In the last minute of the tape, just as I leave frame, something flickers at the edge of the shot, a glitch almost, but not a technical one. A shimmer of static shaped like a woman, pale, long-haired, still, and her eyes, 2 white reflections, stare directly at the camera, not into it, through it. I stopped the tape, unplugged the whole system. The power flickered as I did. 3 lights in the corridor burned out. The chapel bell rang once, even though the rope had been cut since 2009. And when I turned to leave, something was written on the chalkboard used to schedule plots. Just one word, Mara. in handwriting I recognized from the sticky note on my locker. Only this time, it wasn't ink. It was ash. I didn't sleep that day. Not because I wasn't tired. God knows my bones felt like rusted bolts grinding in place. But because I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, I might open them in that surveillance tape. Alone, but doing things I didn't remember. Touching things I shouldn't. Hearing voices that weren't mine. So I stayed awake. Sat at the kitchen table with the blinds shut, the phone off, and the service revolver I hadn't touched in 12 years laid flat in front of me like a question I didn't know how to answer. Around 4 in the afternoon, I decided to drive into town. Not for groceries or air. I needed records, proof, something, anything. I drove to the county office where the cemetery contracts are processed. Took me 30 minutes to convince the clerk to let me see the most recent files. My name still holds some weight there, even if my badge is faded and I smell like earth. She pulled out the latest onboarding logs, scribbled with pen, time-stamped like receipts of the dead. I scanned them with shaking fingers. No Mara, no intern, no form matching the date she arrived, no central operations signature. Just my name again and again, under primary caretaker, signed 5 times in 5 different styles, like someone had been forging it. Some signatures looked like mine when I was 30. Others looked like I'd been drunk or scared. One looked like someone traced my name but didn't know how to hold a pen. The clerk asked if I was okay. I nodded, because I didn't know how to say, "There's a dead woman working with me, and I think she's learning to become me." Instead, I asked for the old employee archives, the ones kept from the previous cemeteries that were consolidated into ours. She hesitated, then disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she handed me a manila folder, thin, dry. The paper inside felt like it hadn't been touched in years. I flipped through it until I saw a photo. Black and white, grainy, but her face. Same eyes, same pale skin, same hair that seemed to swallow the shadows around it. Underneath the photo, in faded typewriter ink, Mara H., intern, assigned 1986, found deceased on premises, October 1987, cause of death, exposure. Found in the ossuary chamber, eyes open, wrists fractured, mouth full of soil. Body was never claimed. Burial location, unmarked. Plot, unknown. I felt the folder fall from my hands. My knees buckled. The floor felt far away. The room smelled like her, old roses and wet iron. The clerk was saying something, but her voice faded under a rising sound in my ears, like shovels digging through cement. When I finally stood, I asked if I could keep the file. The clerk frowned. "What file?" she said. I looked down. Nothing in my hands. No folder. No papers. Not even dust. Just a small black ribbon on the floor at my feet. I didn't pick it up. I turned and left. Drove back in silence. And when I got to the cemetery gates, I saw her standing there. Hands folded. Face calm. And a name tag on her coat. For the first time. It read, Ellis. The next night, I almost didn't go in. I sat in my truck for nearly an hour past my shift start time. The headlights off, engine running low and warm like a heartbeat I no longer trusted. I stared through the windshield at the north gate, waiting for her to appear again. Mara, or the thing wearing Mara's shape. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself, but I'd started to fear that she wasn't just part of this place anymore. She was this place, and every step I took inside those gates felt less like walking into a job and more like stepping into her memory. Still, I went in, because some part of me needed to know how deep this went, and because when you've buried over 2,000 people, something in you stops fearing the dead, or thinks it does. She was already in the chapel when I arrived, not waiting at the gate like before, just already inside, standing near the wall where we keep the cremation urns, one hand resting on a brass plaque labeled Unknown Male, 1994. Her eyes were closed. That was new. I watched her for a moment, unsure if she was praying or remembering. Then she opened them and looked at me. Still no blinking, but something was different. There was a tension in her face, like the mask she wore was starting to crack. I didn't speak. I just motioned that we should start the rounds. She followed. We walked the west path first, where the older tombs sit half sunken in the moss, the the kind that look like they're sinking into the underworld instead of the ground. I tried to avoid eye contact, but when I glanced at her, she was already staring. Not at me, behind me. I turned. Nothing there. No breeze, no shadow, no sound. Just stones. That's when I heard it. A thump. Soft. Hollow. Then again. Coming from one of the newer graves. Plot B219. A man named Franklin Dunn. Died 2 weeks earlier. Natural causes. 71. Lived alone. No visitors. I remembered his face because he had that saggy skin around his mouth that made him look like he was always mid-sentence. I stepped closer. The sound repeated. Thump. Pause. Thump. Then, unmistakably, a creak of wood. I looked at Mara. She didn't move. Her eyes locked on the soil. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Don't open it. I don't know why I didn't listen. Maybe because I'd spent too many years convincing myself that science beat superstition. Maybe because something about her authority made me want to rebel, just to feel like I still had a choice. So I grabbed the shovel, dug through the soil like a man possessed. Faster than I should have, like my body remembered something I didn't. The ground gave too easily, as if it wanted me to reach the box. When I hit wood, the sound stopped. I wiped the dirt off the lid, knelt down, and opened it. Franklin Dunn's corpse lay exactly as we left it. Pale, suited, hands folded, but there was something wrong. His mouth wasn't closed. It was stretched, just slightly, into a smile. Not a death spasm, a smile. His eyes, still sealed by the mortician's glue, trembled, almost imperceptibly. Mara knelt beside me, her face calm, too calm. "He knows your name now," she said. Then she stood, walked away. Left me there, crouched beside a smiling corpse, with the sudden weight of 100 questions pressing down on my chest like wet earth. I slammed the casket shut, filled the hole faster than I should have. The shovel shook in my hands, and as I turned to leave, I saw the dirt over the grave begin to shift, just slightly, as if something underneath was laughing. I didn't finish the shift. I left the grave half settled, the soil uneven, and the grass peeled back like skin. I told myself I'd come back in the morning, that I'd finish it with sunlight on my neck and the sound of traffic somewhere in the distance to remind me the world still moved. But I didn't come back. Not then. I got into my truck, locked the doors without knowing why, and drove straight through the cemetery's south access road, gravel biting at the tires like teeth. I didn't even check if Mara was watching. I didn't want to know. I needed distance, space. Oxygen that didn't smell like memory or iron or secrets. I passed the front gate, heart hammering, hands white-knuckled around the wheel, and then I saw the trees. Familiar. Too familiar. Same crooked shape, same leaning post by the entrance. I blinked. The truck kept moving. I passed the same gate again. Again. The same chipped sign that said, "Notice, visitors must check in at main office." The same broken chain that no one bothered to replace since 2003. I checked my GPS. No signal. Just a black screen. The road looped again. I slowed the truck, stopped completely, got out. The wind had stopped. Even the insects, always humming under the surface of the soil, were silent. I walked toward the gate on foot, looked for the road sign that used to point to the town's outer limits. It was gone. In its place was another sign, older, wooden, carved in a hand that didn't belong in this century. Caretakers only. The paint was wet. I turned back to the truck, ready to floor the gas and keep going until I saw neon lights and heard someone say my name that didn't sound like her. But the truck was gone. Not stolen, not crashed. Just not there. Only tire tracks, leading in a perfect circle, ending where I stood. I ran. I don't remember how long or in which direction. It didn't matter. Every path brought me back to the same row of graves, the same cracked angel statue with one wing, the same bench with the inscription, "To watch over what we cannot forget." And Mara was always there, sometimes far off, standing beneath the oak with her hands folded, sometimes closer, sometimes just behind me. I tried not to turn around when I felt her breath on my collar. The cemetery had closed itself around me like a jaw. I don't know how long I've been here now. The sky never changes. It's always overcast, like it's mourning something that hasn't happened yet. I find water in the chapel. The food I bring in spoils within hours. But the flowers on the nameless graves, they never die. Mara still walks the paths with me. She doesn't speak unless I do. She doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, but she waits. Sometimes she hums old hymns I don't recognize. Other times she just stares at the tombs like she's reading something no one else can see. I've stopped asking her questions, because I think I already know the answers. Last night, I found a new grave. One I hadn't dug. No tools, no disturbed soil, just a headstone. Already aged, already weathered. My name on it. No date of death. Just one line beneath. You were always here. I sat down beside it, not to cry. I think I ran out of that a long time ago. But because I finally understood, you don't become a part of this place. You realize you always were. And the dead, they never needed doors to get out. They only needed someone to leave one open. Story 4. I was just about to lock the shed and head home when I saw him. The man stood by the gate, half shadowed by the iron arch, as if he'd been carved out of the dusk itself. His suit was outdated, mid-century style, faded brown with buttons too small for modern fingers, and his skin had the pallor of paper left too long in a closed drawer. He didn't move like someone unsure of where they were. He moved like someone who had already been here, many times, in dreams or in death. I remember thinking, almost absently, that he looked like a man who had already buried himself once and come back to take notes. He approached slowly, each footstep soft on the gravel like he was being careful not to wake the ground. No limp, no cane, no visible age dragging him down, but everything about him whispered that he had lived too long, too quietly. He didn't introduce himself, just held out a stack of papers bound in twine and sealed in red wax. My name was written on the front. Full name, first, middle, last. Not many people know my middle name. Even fewer spell it right. That should have been the first sign. Inside the bundle was a contract, signed, witnessed, notarized in a county I didn't recognize. It stated, in plain language, that the bearer requested to be buried alive, without embalming, with full consent and legal indemnity. It had been filed with the cemetery's management office, a place I hadn't stepped foot in since they digitized everything. I don't know how he got it approved. I don't know how he found my shift, my schedule, or even my name, but everything was there, stamped, dated, authenticated. The envelope that followed was thick, full of old bills, hundreds, maybe thousands. The corners were frayed like they'd been through too many hands or none at all. He looked me in the eyes for the first time then. They were gray, almost silver, and they didn't blink, not once. Tonight, he said, before the moon reaches the top of the chapel. His voice wasn't raspy or threatening. It was tired, deep tired, the kind of tired that seeps from your bones when your body's ready but your soul's still pacing. I asked him why. He smiled, small, almost sad. I'm not dying, he said. I'm just going somewhere else, somewhere I won't be followed. The body's just a key. I didn't know what to say. I should have refused. Called someone. Refused the money. But something about him, something I can't quite explain, made me believe he wasn't asking for a burial. He was asking for passage. He gave me one more paper, handwritten, slanted cursive like someone had learned penmanship in a time when that still meant something. It read, "Do not dig again. Do not open. There will be nothing inside. Only the sound." He nodded once and turned, walking toward the back gate, where I kept the burial tools. The padlock clicked open before I reached it. No key, no pressure. Just an old lock obeying a command that didn't come from me. He walked through, hands in his pockets, not even glancing back. I should have stopped him, but I didn't. By the time I gathered the tools and turned the wheelbarrow toward the east plot, he was already there, standing next to an empty grave we hadn't dug yet. There hadn't been a burial scheduled for that section for another 2 months, but the ground was already turned, the soil loose, like something below had shifted upward, waiting. The casket sat beside it, mahogany, handcrafted, no hinges, no locks, no nails. Inside was velvet, black, not red, a pillow, and space. He climbed in without ceremony, rested his hands on his chest, smiled again. "You'll hear it eventually," he said, "but by then, it'll be too late to follow." I asked him one last time if he was sure. He didn't answer. just closed his eyes. And so I buried him, alone, with the sound of wind behind my back and the contract in my coat pocket. Every shovel of dirt felt wrong, like I was covering a doorway, not a man. When I placed the last scoop and patted it flat, the air around me went still. Not quiet, still, like the world had paused to take note. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my porch staring at the tree line, waiting for something I couldn't name. I went back the next night, against my better judgment. There was no requirement to return. I had done the job, signed the logs, submitted the burial number into the old terminal at the office. But something about that night stayed inside me like a thorn under the nail. The man hadn't asked for anything more, and yet, in his absence, he had taken something, a piece of attention, a small hook in the back of the mind that wouldn't let me focus on anything else. My wife said I looked pale. My dog wouldn't come near me. I chalked it up to guilt, or maybe shame. Maybe I just needed to be sure he was still there. The grave looked untouched, not a flower out of place, not a patch of soil sunken. I walked around the plot 3 times and didn't find so much as a disturbed pebble. That should have calmed me, but I knew how fresh graves behaved. They shifted. They moaned in the morning dew. They released little burps of gas from the pressure beneath. But this one looked like it had never been opened, as if it had always been here, older than the cemetery itself. Midnight came again, and so did the silence. No bugs, no wind, no rustling from the tree line, just the steady ache in my knees and the metallic taste in my mouth that always came when something was wrong in a way I couldn't name. Then came the detail I'd almost forgotten. There had been no nails in the coffin, just a perfect fit, and the man's own arms, folded gently. I had asked him if he wanted to be secured. He laughed softly and said, "I'm already held by something stronger." I didn't understand it at the time. Still don't. But the memory made me sweat under my collar, even though the night was cold. I turned to leave. That's when I saw it. Just beside the grave, half tucked into the base of a tree, was a note. A single scrap of thick paper, yellowed and rough at the edges. I bent to pick it up, hesitant as if it might bite. The handwriting was the same slanted cursive I had seen on the contract. Just 3 words this time. "Still listening. Thank you." I stayed out of the cemetery for a few days after that. Tried to distract myself with maintenance, power washing the mausoleum steps, trimming the hedges that always grew too fast near the angel statues. But nothing settled me. Something about that message was worse than the burial itself. Not just because it implied the man was alive, but because it implied he wasn't alone. Days turned into a week, then a second. The grave never settled. It remained perfectly shaped, as if it had been placed there by a machine. No one came to visit. No deliveries of flowers. No family to ask about him. I even checked the registry at the city clerk's office and found no record of his name, no birth certificate, no social security number. I started to wonder if he'd ever existed at all, or if I had simply buried a ghost that knew how to sign contracts. Then came the sound. It started faint, like an old pipe beneath the shed. A rhythmic thump, then a creak, then a long, slow exhale, like someone was lying beneath a heavy blanket. I traced the sound across the cemetery with my ears alone, and every time, it led back to the same place, his grave. One night, I stood over it again. I brought no shovel, no flashlight, just stood there in the dark and waited. I thought maybe I'd hear something, maybe I'd see him, maybe he'd climb out and tell me what this was all for. But nothing happened, except the air. It pulsed. The grave let off a breath that I felt, not heard, not smelled, but felt, like something unseen brushing past your shoulder in a hallway you know is empty, like a hand slipping from your wrist just before you open your eyes. And then, silence again. The kind of silence you want to run from but can't, because it knows your name now. It was the morning of the 13th day when I found the cassette tape. It wasn't there the night before. I'm sure of it. I always make a round at dusk before heading home, partly out of habit, partly out of respect. That grave, the one I still refused to call by his name, had been undisturbed. But now, right on top of the headstone, was a small plastic case. Black. No label. Just a worn edge where someone had handled it too many times. It looked out of place in a cemetery. Too modern, too plastic, too alive. I didn't touch it right away. I just stared at it for a long time, like it might move on its own. Then I checked the office logs to see if anyone had reported anything. Nothing. No visitors, no deliveries, no grounds crew. Just me. Always just me. I should have thrown it away, should have burned it, buried it, locked it in the mausoleum's furnace. But curiosity has a way of disguising itself as duty. I told myself I had to know what was on it, for safety, for record keeping, for peace of mind. I brought it home and pulled out my old cassette player from the garage. It hadn't been used in over a decade, still dusty from the last time I tried to fix a neighbor's wedding tape. I slid the cassette in, clicked it shut, and pressed play. At first, there was nothing, just tape hiss, then breathing. Not gasping, not panicked, just slow, rhythmic breaths. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, like someone sleeping deeply, but not peacefully. There was tension in it, like they were holding back, as if something inside the lungs didn't want to be shared with the air. And then, the pitch shifted, barely. The rhythm changed, the breaths got slower, more deliberate. I turned the volume up. Underneath the breathing there was something else. A rustle, a faint drag, like fabric against wood, or fingers across stone. It didn't last long, just a few seconds, but it made the hair on my arms stand up like they'd heard something my ears hadn't. Then silence again. Then the breathing returned, louder this time, as if it knew I was listening. I let the tape run to the end. It stopped with a soft click. No voices, no music, no message, just those sounds. I rewound it and played it again. Same pattern, same pace, same heavy exhale. I listened to it 3 more times that night. Each time it felt like the breathing got closer. Not louder, closer. I could feel it on my skin, could hear it inside the walls. I didn't sleep. When I returned to the cemetery the next morning, something had changed. The soil on that grave, his grave, was damp. But it hadn't rained. The air around it was colder than the rest of the cemetery, even in the sunlight. No birds landed near it. No insects buzzed. The grass had begun to yellow in a perfect ring around the plot, like something had burned outward from underneath. And the strangest part? The other graves, every one of them, had tilted. Not much, just a few degrees. But they all leaned slightly in one direction, toward his. I checked the security cameras, though I knew it would be pointless. The feed had cut out at exactly midnight. Black screen. Static. Returned to normal at 12:06. The gap was clean, precise. Not mechanical failure. Intentional silence. That evening, I brought the tape back to the grave. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would stop if I returned it. Maybe I hoped it was a message I wasn't meant to keep. I placed it gently on the headstone. No note, no explanation. Just a silent apology in my breath. The next morning, the tape was gone. And in its place, a new one. Same cassette, same look. But this time, when I pressed play, the breathing was faster, closer, and layered underneath it, barely perceptible, was a whisper. 3 words. "You heard me." I slammed the stop button and ejected the tape, but it didn't feel like it helped. That voice had already crawled inside my ears, nested somewhere behind the bones of my skull. I didn't sleep that night either, nor the next. The sound was in the pipes, in the floorboards, in the rhythm of my own heartbeat. It's still there now, even as I write this. Even as I try to forget what I never should have heard. I tried not to go back. I told myself I was done, that I'd done my part, that whatever I had witnessed or invited could be forgotten if I just stayed away from that corner of the cemetery. But isolation doesn't silence obsession. It amplifies it. I started waking up at 3:17 a.m. every morning, choking on air that wasn't mine. I'd look toward the window and feel something on the other side of the glass, watching, patient, quiet, the kind of presence that didn't need eyes to see you. It just knew. On the 15th day, I broke. I packed a thermos of black coffee, grabbed my work boots, and made the walk in darkness. I brought a shovel, not because I planned to use it, but because leaving it behind felt dishonest. The ground was softer than it should have been, damp even though the last rain had fallen more than a week ago. The grass around the grave was dying in strange spirals, curling toward the earth like it was being pulled. I told myself I'd just check. One look. just to make sure I hadn't imagined the emptiness of that box, that maybe I had made some error, missed something, that my sanity could be restored with logic and wood. I dug in silence. No wind, no owls, just the sound of steel biting dirt and my own breathing, faster than usual, shallow, like I didn't want to inhale what the grave was giving off. The scent grew heavier the deeper I went. Not rot, something more metallic, salt and ozone, like blood cooked by lightning. When the blade of my shovel hit the wood, I stopped. My palms were shaking, but I wasn't cold. I cleared the rest by hand, dirt under my nails, sweat mixing with the smell that rose up from the ground, like steam from a vent that shouldn't exist. The coffin looked untouched, perfectly sealed. No moisture, no soil inside the seams. Just smooth, black lacquer. Too smooth. I opened it. No corpse. Not even clothes. Just finger marks. Dozens of them. Pressed into the inside of the lid like someone had tried to claw their way out, or press something in. Deep grooves, like fingernails made of iron. In the very center, nestled against the velvet lining, was the cassette recorder. The same one. Or maybe not. Maybe it was just shaped like the one I had returned. It was already running. No play button pressed. No movement. But the tape was turning, and that sound, so familiar now, echoed from it, louder than before. The breathing, closer, wetter, like it was behind my ears instead of in front of me. I should have run. Should have buried it all and lit it ablaze. But I couldn't move. Then the sound changed. It wasn't just breathing anymore. There was dragging, like something pulling itself across stone, slowly, patiently, with intention. I leaned in despite myself, and then it stopped. For exactly 5 seconds there was nothing. Then, a knock. From beneath. One. Solid. Knock. I dropped the recorder and stumbled back, landing hard against another headstone. The air was thick, heavy like underwater pressure, and the trees surrounding the grave began to creak, even though there was no wind. I looked around, and that's when I noticed something else. Something worse than the knock. Every other tombstone in that row had shifted again. They were all tilting. Toward me. Not the grave. Me. It was like the whole cemetery had decided to face a different direction, like I had become the new center of something I didn't understand. Something ancient and breathing and buried wrong. I tried to speak, but my throat was locked. My body refused to obey. The air felt like syrup, thick and invasive. The scent of scorched metal and something older than rot filled my nose. I forced myself to my feet, abandoned the coffin, and ran. I don't remember how I got home. I just remember waking up in my kitchen, mud on my boots, fingernails cracked, and my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd burst from the inside. That was 3 days ago. The recorder was waiting on my front porch this morning. No package, no label. Still playing. And this time, the breathing wasn't slow. It was panting, like it had been running, and it was getting close. The only reason I didn't burn the recorder the moment I saw it was because I was afraid it wouldn't burn. I didn't even touch it, just stared at it sitting there on the porch rail like it belonged to the house now, like it had always been there. My dog growled from the other side of the door, low and steady, refusing to come near the threshold. I wrapped the tape in a towel, shoved it into the metal lockbox where I kept my father's old service pistol, and drove straight to the cemetery. I don't remember deciding to go. I was just suddenly back on those grounds, shovel in the truck bed, boots laced up without ever tying them. It was sunset, the kind of red sky that looks bruised, the kind that turns shadows long and angry. I walked past the chapel, past the oak tree that always leaned just a little too far over the path, and into the southern quadrant, the older section where the stones crumbled even when untouched and moss grew where names should have been. But the path was wrong, longer, bending where it shouldn't. Trees that had stood still for 100 years now leaned toward me like listeners. The gate I passed minutes ago now stood behind me again. I had walked straight, but it was ahead of me too. Somehow, I was already trapped. The office was dark, the lights wouldn't turn on. My keys wouldn't fit the locks. The graveyard had gone silent again, and the silence felt like pressure, like it was waiting for me to speak, to confess. But I had nothing to give but fear. So I went to the grave, the same one, still perfect, still untouched, except this time, it was open, not dug, not vandalized, just open, like it had always been waiting for a return. The soil perfectly peeled, the coffin lid propped as if by invisible hands. I didn't want to look inside, but my body betrayed me. I approached slowly and peered into the void. Empty, except for the recorder, still running, but the tape was no longer looping. It was playing something new, a voice, low, gravel-thick, not words, just syllables stretched and broken, like language trying to remember itself. It sounded like the voice had once belonged to the man I buried, but had traveled too far and come back changed. And then I saw him, at the far edge of the cemetery, by the wrought iron fence no one had opened in 20 years, standing, watching, still wearing the same suit, now grayer, now tighter to his skin like it had fused to him. His eyes were hollow, not empty but hollow, like tunnels, like the beginning of something endless. He raised a hand, not to wave, not to greet, but to beckon. My legs moved on their own. I stepped forward, and the world bent. The sky folded downward like wet paper. The trees curved away from the stars. My next step didn't land on gravel or grass. It landed on something that pulsed, a surface that felt like breathing marble. And behind me, the cemetery no longer looked like the one I knew. The paths had rearranged. The tombstones had multiplied, and each one bore my name. Dozens of them. Different dates, different epitaphs, but the same name. I turned to run. The gate was gone, the chapel, gone, the office, a ruin I didn't recognize. Only the grave remained, and beside it, him, still whispering. Only now I could understand. He was saying over and over, "Your turn, your turn, your turn." I backed away. I screamed. I threw the recorder at him and turned to flee, but the path led nowhere. The stars above blinked out, one by one, as if something had closed its eyes. The world shrank inward, pulling sound and light and time with it. Then I blinked, and I was inside the coffin. The same velvet, the same lid. But the recorder wasn't playing anymore. It was recording. The red light blinked once, and I heard my own voice. This is the last time I remember breathing. Then darkness. Still breathing. Still listening. Story 5. My name is Henry Callahan. I've been the caretaker of Green Hollow Cemetery for 32 years. There isn't a blade of grass on that land I haven't trimmed myself, nor a headstone I haven't cleaned with my own hands. I've buried hundreds, maybe more, but I remember every last one, every grief-stricken family, every nervous preacher, every final glance before the coffin lowered. That is, until the baby. It was a Tuesday in late October. Cold, but not quite winter. The kind of gray that turns the sky into a lid. The woman arrived just before 4. Alone. No procession, no priest, no flowers. Just her, dressed in what looked like mourning clothes from another century. Her veil was thick, black lace, and beneath it I could barely see her eyes. But I saw her hands. They didn't shake. Not from cold, not from anything. She handed me a paper. Authorization for burial. Plot 42 South, near the willow tree. I glanced at the coffin in the back of her long black car. It was small, infant-sized. My stomach sank, the way it always does with the little ones. But something about this one was different. No name, not on the form, not on the tag, no date of birth, no cause of death. Just a line where a name should be, crossed through. She didn't say a word. I asked twice, maybe 3 times. "Are you sure there's no one else coming?" She only nodded once. We walked in silence to the grave I'd dug that morning. I lowered the box gently, respectfully. I'd seen parents fall to their knees during moments like that, seen grown men break apart. But she stood motionless as I shoveled the first scoop of dirt. When I looked up, she was gone. No car pulling away, no crunch of gravel, just gone. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at that mound. Something about it unsettled me, like I had sealed something away that hadn't been ready to leave. That night, I filed the paperwork like I always do, logged the burial in the registry. Only I noticed the entry blinked twice on the screen, like a glitch. When I clicked to verify, the name field simply said, Q. No error code, just a dash. I rebooted the system, thinking it was nothing. The next day, the mail came back. Not just junk mail or returns. Official cemetery bills, invoices, even a letter from my daughter, all stamped, undeliverable, destination not found. I called the post office, annoyed, assuming someone had misfiled our zip code. The clerk on the phone was hesitant, said he'd never seen our street listed. I repeated the address. He paused for a long time before saying, "That street doesn't exist in our records anymore, Mr. Callahan." I laughed, thought it was a joke, hung up. But it kept happening. Every letter, every delivery, refused, returned, rejected. I tried ordering supplies online. My usual flower shop called to say their driver couldn't find the road. Google Maps showed the cemetery entrance, then cut off in a smear of gray pixels, like the land was blurred out, like someone had erased it. The final straw was when a grieving family came by weeks later, wanting to schedule a burial. I brought out the registry. All the plots were there, except 42 South. The number was missing, not blank, gone, as if that part of the grid had folded in on itself. The family changed their mind, chose another cemetery. It's been quiet since then. No new funerals, no visitors, just me and the trees, and that grave. The baby's mound never settled right. The earth stays too soft, like something underneath still moves, like the ground refuses to forget, or worse, refuses to let go. It was around the second week after the baby's burial that I noticed the cars stopped turning in. At first, I thought it was just the season, wet roads, folks visiting less. But then even the hearses stopped at the main road and made me walk the stretch with the gurney. I asked one of the younger drivers why he wouldn't just pull in. He glanced at his phone, then back at me like I was crazy. "There's no road registered after Willow Bend," he said. "Your cemetery's not on the app anymore. Doesn't even ping." I laughed it off, but my skin went cold. I pulled out my own phone. Same thing. The street I had walked every day for over 30 years just stopped existing on the screen. No error message, no loading symbol. Just a stretch of digital white where Green Hollow Cemetery should have been. Like the map forgot we were here. It got worse. Delivery services marked us as undeliverable. Uber drivers canceled the moment they got within 2 blocks. And then came the mail. First, it was just a few letters returned. Then, everything. Bills, cemetery notices, legal forms, even a birthday card my daughter sent, came back with a red stamp across the front. Destinatario inexistente. Addressee does not exist. The town's zip code still worked for every other location. But the cemetery's gate? Nothing. I drove to the post office, waited in line, and handed a letter directly to our old mailman, Greg. He froze when he saw the return address, and I swear, a tremor ran through his hand. I'll try, he said. He didn't come back the next day, or the day after. A week later, the branch said he had requested an emergency transfer, citing mental health stress. They said he didn't leave a forwarding address. That wasn't like Greg. I knew him. We shared beers behind the chapel some nights when the moon was full, and the grief felt heavy. He wouldn't just disappear, unless something followed him home. One night I stayed late trying to catch the florist who used to leave wreaths by the gate, but no one came. As I stood by the road, I saw headlights approach, then flicker off before the car reached the bend. I ran forward, yelling, waving my flashlight. Nothing. The road was empty again. No tire marks, no wind. Just silence, thick and choking. I walked back to the gate and noticed something odd. The street sign was gone. The post was still there, but the metal plate that said Green Hollow Road had vanished, as if someone had unscrewed it in the night and erased the name from memory. Back in my office, I pulled out old town directories, old zoning maps. Each one showed our street, clear as day. But the most recent map, a new one mailed last month from the city council, cut off our location. A clean white space sat where we used to be. I stared at it, hands shaking, as the weight of something unspeakable settled in my chest. We were still here. The graves were still here. I was still here. But to the rest of the world, it was like Green Hollow had already been buried. By the third week, I wasn't just unsettled. I was beginning to feel removed, like I was maintaining something the world had already decided to forget. The flower trucks stopped. So did the families. I called city services to ask about repairs to the cracked pavement near the gate. The woman on the phone said she'd look it up. Then she paused and asked, "Sir, what cemetery did you say again?" I repeated it. Green Hollow. A silence stretched over the line. Then she said, "We don't have a record of that in the system." I laughed, because of course they did. But she didn't laugh. "I'm sorry, sir, but that address isn't zoned." "Are you sure that's the name?" That's when I reached out to a man I knew from the municipal archive team, an old friend named Clive. He owed me a favor. I asked him to run an aerial scan of the property. Drones, updated satellite images, anything. He agreed. Said it'd be a fun distraction. That night, I walked through the cemetery with a flashlight and a cigarette, just like I used to when I couldn't sleep. Everything looked the same. Rows of stone, the angel near the east fence, the bench under the cypress trees. But the feeling was different, as if I were walking on something above the ground, like the real soil had been removed and replaced with a placeholder version. Something too quiet, too hollow. Clive called me 3 days later. "I'm going to send you what we got," he said. "But look, I can't explain it. It's not the drone. The equipment's fine. But every file from your property came back corrupted. The video cuts out the moment the drone approaches your coordinates. There's just blackness, not even static. Nothing." He sent me the footage. I watched it that night on the small TV in the chapel. The drone rose over the city, clear as daylight. I saw rooftops, trees, traffic, but as it approached Green Hollow, the frame stuttered, just once, and then turned to total black. The time code kept ticking, but the image never returned. When it finally moved on, past the cemetery's far edge, the picture snapped back like nothing had happened. Clive tried again with satellite stills. The results were worse. The software glitched, froze. He said it was like the system couldn't comprehend the space. "It's like your property isn't a location anymore. It's a void," he told me. Even the satellite's onboard AI marked it as non-terrain. Never seen that before. That same night, while checking the northwest row, the oldest graves, I noticed a faint buzzing, not in my ears, in the air, like an engine, muffled beneath layers of earth. I followed it. It led me to the grave of the baby, the one without a name, the one that started this. I knelt beside the headstone and placed my hand on the soil. It wasn't just cold, it pulsed, faintly, as if something beneath it was aware. I backed away, but the buzzing didn't stop. It followed me to the chapel. It faded only when I shut the office door. I looked down at the town's most recent map still taped to the wall. Our street, again, was gone, but something else had changed. The map had a faint discoloration in the bottom corner, like ink had bled. And where the cemetery should have been, I now saw only a label typed in pale gray, area unrecognized. I slept in my truck that night, but even with the windows up, I kept hearing it. That low, steady hum, like an engine from someplace far beneath us, waiting, or remembering. By now I had stopped expecting visitors. The gate hadn't opened in weeks. The driveway, once pressed down by tires and footsteps, now held only the grooves of old memories. But I stayed. I told myself it was duty, that even if the world forgot Green Hollow, someone had to remember. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. I stayed because I couldn't leave. Not really. Each attempt ended the same way. Circle back, engine stalls, radio static. The road from the cemetery never extended far anymore. You'd drive for 20 minutes, and somehow be right back in front of the iron gate, headlights on stone. I started noticing the absence of sound first. The normal things, wind through trees, birds overhead, the far-off rattle of trucks. They faded. I tried turning on the radio, but every frequency gave me the same signal. Silence. Except one, a faint loop of what sounded like breathing, slow, deliberate, like someone sleeping deep beneath the ground. I checked the chapel's equipment. All fine. Still, the loop would cut through the silence like a whisper you didn't want to hear. Then, something new. I'd hear horns from the distant highway, cars passing, but no one would ever arrive. At first, I thought it was just traffic nearby, but the sound never got closer. It repeated. Same pitch, same distance, as if recorded and replayed by something trying to imitate life just enough to be noticed. One night, I stood by the gate and saw headlights in the fog. They hovered for minutes, then vanished. Not turned, not reversed, just gone. I walked back to the office, trying to ignore the sense that something was watching. I found a letter on my desk. The office was locked, the windows sealed. Yet there it was, scented, clean, handwritten. No stamp, no sender. The paper smelled damp, like old wood and damp linen. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. It read, in looping script, "You are the last name that remains." That was all. No punctuation, no return address, no ink smudge, just a faint discoloration on the edges, like it had been underground. The rest of the night, I stayed awake. I moved from room to room with a flashlight. I opened every drawer, checked every door. I even inspected the old maintenance tunnels below the chapel. Nothing. Just cobwebs, broken bulbs, and forgotten tools. But when I returned upstairs, something had changed. The map on the wall, now with that stain in the corner, had darkened. Where the words "area unrecognized" had once appeared, there was now a single name typed below it, mine. From then on, the voices started. Not in my head, at least not at first. They came through the intercom in the chapel, through the service radio, through the old walkie-talkies we used back when this place still had a team. Always faint, always low. Not full sentences, just pieces. "Stay," they'd whisper. Or, "You are us now." Once I heard what sounded like a baby crying. Another time, it was laughter. Familiar laughter. My wife's. She's been gone 10 years. I stopped turning off the lights, stopped locking the doors. It didn't make a difference anymore. Because each time I opened my eyes, I found another envelope on the desk. No footsteps, no fingerprints. Just a new line each night, written in the same slow hand. "This is where your name will rest. There is no one left to write to. You are the memory now. The gates don't open anymore. The keypad is dead. The cemetery is mine. Or maybe I am its. I can't hear the city, can't reach anyone, but I still feel the hum under the ground, the weight of eyes behind every crooked headstone, and the presence of something patient, something that isn't finished writing yet." The days began to blur, but not in the way you'd expect when someone loses track of time. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was something deeper, stranger, as if the rules that governed minutes and hours had begun to unravel inside these gates. The first thing I noticed was the clock in the chapel. A simple wall clock, battery-powered, always punctual. One morning, it had stopped at 3:33 a.m. I replaced the batteries. It ticked again. Then the next day, 3:33 a.m. again. Every single time. It never moved beyond that minute. And after a while, I stopped trying to fix it. But I kept waking up at that exact time, like something invisible had tapped my shoulder in the dark. Then came the sundial. I had installed it in the garden years ago, mostly as decoration, but I began to notice that the shadow it cast no longer aligned with the sun. It rotated slowly, almost imperceptibly, counterclockwise, as if time itself was being unwound. Some afternoons it would point straight down even when the sky was cloudless. On other days the sun would rise but never quite set. It just hovered. The light turned brittle, like the hue of an old photograph. I stopped trusting the sky. I stopped trusting anything outside the fence. The worst was when I tried to call my brother. He was the only one left who knew I still worked here. I stood by the chapel phone, dialed his number like I'd done 100 times before. It rang. Once. Then static. I thought it was a bad line, so I sent a text with my location. A few minutes later, the reply came back in green bubbles. "This area does not exist. Try again." That was all. No punctuation, no concern. Just a finality that made the room feel heavier. I stepped outside, needing air, needing proof the world still turned. The path to the gates was lined with fog, low and cold against my boots. I tried walking toward the front gate. Every step forward felt longer than the last. Trees I'd passed 100 times now stood at unfamiliar angles. Some faced inward when they shouldn't. The wind whispered in reverse. It wasn't until I looked behind me that I realized I hadn't moved. I was still standing at the chapel door. My footprints in the dirt vanished with each attempt, swallowed up like they'd never been there. That night a new grave appeared. I hadn't dug it. I checked the burial logs. Nothing. No deliveries. No requests. But there it was, in the far eastern corner, where the soil always stayed damp no matter the season. A fresh plot, A smooth headstone, no flowers, no markings, except a name, mine, carved in clean, serifed stone. Below it, a date, tomorrow. My hands went cold. I stared for what felt like hours. The trees didn't move, the wind didn't shift. Everything in the cemetery leaned slightly toward the grave, like gravity itself had made a decision. I touched the stone. It was warm, not like sunlight warm, but like something beneath the ground was alive. I went back to the chapel and found the letter. It was already waiting on the desk. No envelope this time, just a page, handwritten, damp with the same smell as before. Dirt, salt, something bitter. The message was shorter than the others. 4 words. Time ends with you. I haven't slept since. I can't. The clocks don't tick. The shadows don't grow. And when I look out across the gravestones now, they all lean just a little further every night. All toward the same direction. All toward that fresh grave. Mine. I'm no longer sure if I'm alive, or if I've already been buried, and this is the echo of what I was. But if anyone finds this, if this place somehow reappears on a map, on a route, on a letter, know that there's a reason it vanished. There's a reason deliveries stop. A reason footsteps fade. We were meant to forget. But I stayed too long. I watched too closely. I remembered. And now, I'm the last name they can still write.